welcome to Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Shriya, and today we'll take a look at the outcome of the NATO Summit in Madrid, a strike in Panama, and how 3 top 20 men's players in Wimbledon have been declared out of contention after they tested COVID positive. Our first story is from the NATO Summit in Madrid, which concluded on Thursday, June 30. As expected, the alliance did the groundwork for its expansion, renewed its focus on Russia, and for the first time identified China as a rival. The North Atlantic Alliance has thus officially proclaimed its global scope. People across the world are justly concerned over the outcome, and to know more, we have with us Prashant from People's Dispatch. So Prashant, welcome to the show. Can you tell us what are the major outcomes of this summit?
Right, Shreya. So like you summarized, basically there are 2 or 3 aspects which we need to focus on. One is the fact that one of the issues that got the most amount of focus is the membership of these 2 countries, Finland and Sweden. The groundwork has been laid for that. Turkey has withdrawn its objections after getting some concessions. Now there's still a bit of debate about that. But anyway, so it looks like these 2 countries are definitely joining, which means another expansion of NATO, 32 members, now it will be 32 members, and again stretching to the borders of the Soviet of Russia, since Finland has borders with Russia. Then of course we know the fact that there has been a very concerted attempt to sort of boost the alliance's military presence in Europe. So we're going to see the expansion of the NATO force in the continent to about 300,000 from 40,000. Now that's a huge increase. We're also going to see new bases being set up, for instance, in the US base in Poland, which has not happened before. More investment, more countries have been asked to invest. UK has, for instance, said that it will increase its investment for NATO, for instance. Other countries also promised in various ways. That's another aspect. The third aspect, of course, is that the release of the new NATO strategic document, which, like you said, identifies China as in some senses a rival. If you look at the writing, I mean, it's a very anodyne document in some senses. It speaks a lot in generalities, but when it comes to Russia and China, some very clear messages that are being said. For instance, it says that China challenges our interests, security, and values, and it says that Russia and China together are attempting to undercut the rules-based international order. And apparently China is offering what are called systemic challenges to Euro-Atlantic security. There's no evidence provided of anything of this sort, of course. But all these are in fact very vital points to sort of indicate the fact that what NATO really wants to do, or what it seems to do, is going to do, is basically expand its footprint, become a global organization, a global gendarme, so to speak. And we need to see this in the context of other initiatives such as AUKUS, Australia, UK, and the United States, which has been set up. There's also the Quad, which is slightly receded in the background. We know that there are fresh alliances being made in West Asia, and of course NATO has a long history of taking part in conflicts which are very far away from the North Atlantic, which is its name, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So is Libya in the North Atlantic? No. Is Afghanistan in the North Atlantic? No, definitely not. But nonetheless, NATO has been there in all these places. So this looks like it's an expansion of all these, this idea itself to make it a kind of global power. They've appropriated to themselves, it seems, the right to sort of intervene in some of these conflicts by claiming threats for which, again, like I said, they provided no real evidence of the fact of anything of this sort. And the important thing is that this comes after, last year in 2021, around the same time we were talking about, what is the future of NATO? Is there a future at all? After NATO had withdrawn from Afghanistan, the fact that there were dissensions inside the alliance, there was no clarity on what would happen. So this is also an attempt to sort of renew its mandate in some senses and proclaim itself to be a resurgent alliance. The funny thing is, of course, that they claim that they're a defensive alliance. It comes up multiple times in this document. We're a defensive alliance, we're a defensive alliance. But the way they identify the strategic priorities, it doesn't seem defensive at all, because the references to nuclear weapons, of course, also they say that they'll be cautious about it, but they're very explicit about it. So all this together sort of definitely does not give the indication that this is a defensive alliance working. This definitely looks like a very aggressive global alliance that is really sort of, getting in motion to expand its scope.
And Prashant, what does this bode for the future, the summit now?
Right, Shreya. So this is, there are multiple ways to look at it, of course. Now, one important thing is that these are, of course, statements. These are, of course, proclamations. Now, what really is going to happen, what really is going to define things is how various developments in other regions pan out. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine war, it could go in various ways. We know that the United Kingdom, for instance, has announced that it will increase military spending. Incidentally, they're saying that they're going to allot this increased spending from what are called underspent departmental funds, which means money that is supposed to go for developmental purposes maybe, is basically what is being diverted by claiming that these departments did not spend it, whereas the fact that there is a huge public spending issue in the UK. Now, but keep that aside, but the Russia-Ukraine war itself could, go in multiple directions. That's a huge factor. We know that in Central Asia, on the same time this was happening, Vladimir Putin was talking to the leaders of Central Asian countries. We know that China is playing a huge role in Central Asia. So this is a very important region that how the consolidations will happen there will be a key aspect. In Southeast Asia, we know that there's the RCEP treaty, which has bound together a lot of these countries in economic relations. So as much as NATO likes to say that it is going to do all this, it's going to protect the world, etc., etc., and protect themselves, the fact that there are multiple forces which are really working against that as well. We know that, for instance, in North Africa, there is a huge pushback against a lot of NATO powers as well. The French were pushed out of Mali. There's a lot of anger against US presence, although the US is trying to expand it. We know that in Latin America, historic process is taking place, which is pushing back against US policies in the region, a wave of elections which have contested that. We saw it recently in the Summit of the Americas. So all this together, there are multiple processes. So as much as NATO wishes to say that, give the impression that it is united and it is the future, so to speak, the real question is that are these processes in various parts of the world actually going to allow that? And whether countries will choose to define themselves by the economic bonds of good relations. One important thing about these kind of economic bonds is the fact that it brings together a set of relations which are difficult to break because countries are tied to each other. So those kind of blocks, will they gain in strength? What will be the impact of that is really a key question. NATO, it looks like, will seek to foment dissent in many of these regions as well, but there is a strong incentive for countries to work together on many of these issues. And in this context, a coalition of basically colonial powers, a coalition of countries with the North Atlantic region who really have no stake in most parts of the world, who are in fact a brutal history of oppressing many of these countries. Why would they even be involved is the question before many of the countries in the global south. So that's really what they need to ask themselves. How do they band together in the region? How do they sort of say put up a different set of alternatives? And if there are meaningful ways of doing that, all these pronouncements by NATO don't really make much of a difference, because we also know that NATO countries are also facing their own internal crisis. There's going to be a major energy crisis in Europe. The United States in the throes of a social and economic crisis. So, I would, ultimately, of course, very difficult to predict the future. But there are, I think, multiple forces at work, not just that of NATO. And while NATO will try its best to present a particular phase or put a particular foot forward, the process of history might well push that back, as for all we know.
Thank you, Prashant, for that update. We next go to Panama, another country where increasing prices have hit livelihoods and brought people to the streets under the leadership of trade unions and people's movements. The crisis has been ongoing for a while now. In October, thousands took to the streets against the government of Laurentino Cortizo, protesting rampant inflation, rising unemployment, and deteriorating public services. We have with us Zoe of People's Dispatch for more. So thank you so much for joining us today, Zoe, and welcome on the show. Can you tell us what's happening on the ground there and what are the demands of those who are protesting?
For sure. So today in Panama, there's a national strike that's being undertaken by different unions and social movements in the country. One of the largest unions in the country, Suntrax, which is the union of the construction workers, is on strike. The transportation workers on strike. And, above all, their demand is that the government of Laurentino Cortizo, who today is 3 years in government, they demand that he lower prices, that he respond to the deep economic crisis facing, the broad section of working class people in Panama. Today, they're facing a aggravated economic crisis, like many people across the world, due to the increase in fuel prices, the increase in the cost of living. They're demanding that the government take action, lower the prices of medicine, lower the prices of basic goods. They have been, in every instance, they have been trying to go to negotiation, to dialogue, demanding that the government reach some sort of an agreement. And so far, what they've communicated is that the government has refused to take any of these demands seriously. And so today, commemorating 3 years of his term in office, they're on the streets across cities and towns in Panama, making road blockades, mobilizing in the major cities, to demand that the government take this crisis seriously. We've seen these kind of protests happening across the region and really across the world as the global inflation crisis, the global economic crisis has gotten worse, and governments have time and time again not taken the demands of the people seriously. And Panama is an interesting case, especially when you look at the fact that it's, one of the kind of safe havens for financial capital and international capital across the world. It's one of the cities where many people, hide their fortunes, where it's a fiscal paradise, a tax haven. And so in this context, the fact that all of these people have so much wealth invested there, yet the people in the country do not have enough to live, are not able to buy basic goods, is just a deep, deep contradiction. And that's why the people are on the streets today.
All right. Also, what do you think about what has been the experience of Cortizo government since its election in 2019?
So Cortizo, the movements have been saying that since he's come to power in 2019, that he has not done anything to change the status quo in the country, and that economic conditions for working people have gotten worse. Of course, this is added to the fact that it's been the COVID-19 pandemic, and Panama lost almost 20% of its GDP in 2020. So this has obviously had a very deep impact on the economic conditions of the people. Panama, the Panamanians have been on the streets consistently throughout the 3 years of his government. There have been many different national strikes organized by different sectors of society, people angry with the situation. And so the evaluation by most movements and trade unions and social sectors in the country is that the government has not done enough to combat corruption. It has not done enough to combat rising fuel prices, rising prices of basic goods. And that's, one of the primary reasons that they are continuing to protest and demanding that the government take real action to combat the issues facing the people.
All right. Thank you so much for that update, Zoe. Wimbledon tennis next. You might have heard that the legendary Serena Williams is out of contention, but so are 3 of the top 20 men's players. And for a different reason, that's COVID-19. For more, we chat to NewsClick's Siddhant. So Siddhant, what's really happening at Wimbledon right now?
It's an outbreak of some sort, at least, not a very large scale outbreak. As you mentioned, Shreya, 3 of the top 20 men's players have tested positive and as a result have had to withdraw from the tournament. They are Bautista Agut, Marin Cilic and Matteo Berrettini. So it's Wimbledon this year is already a depleted sort of field because world number 1 Daniil Medvedev, for example, is out because he's banned because he's of Russian nationality. So as such, it's a weakened field already. Roger Federer, as we know, is not in there. And now these 3 top 20 players also going out. So overall, I guess the impact is a diminished sort of competition and fears between those who are still, or among those who are still playing the tournament and therefore exposed to large crowds, a large number of people who come to the venue each day to watch the games. As well as support staff, all kinds of catering staff, all kinds of other people who are involved. So for the players, some are taking more precautions now again, starting to wear masks again. I think we know by now the UK and in much of Europe, none of this is mandated anymore in terms of public behavior. So no one is really checking vaccine certificates, things such as those. So it's pretty much like an open season, and so some concern among players about how much they are at risk, because of course for them it's not just about one tournament, right? Then if you get a bad bout of COVID-19, for example, it might impact the rest of your year, and that impacts how much money you make that year, and so it's a livelihood question as well. So some concerns there, but largely most players are saying, it's fine. We are taking the minimum precautions that or the best precautions that we can, and going ahead. Yeah, so that's the scene.
I was wondering, Siddhant, in terms of large-scale sporting, has COVID-19 as a pandemic in general, has it phased out as a concern?
I think essentially you've summed it up pretty well, Shreya. We had this bit of a fight, those of us who are in the global south. there's a massive disparity in how sporting events have come back on track.
Definitely, yeah.
Whether it's for grassroots level sport or, of course, these kind of showcase events that happen at a massive scale where tens of thousands of people attend and all of that. So, because of vaccine inequity and disparities, Europe was able to bounce back much quicker from the impact of COVID-19 in all respects, and sport is one of them. So for them, by the end of, in fact, the last football season, things had pretty much opened up. So we saw the stampede pretty much that broke out at the Champions League final in Paris a little more than a month ago. So indicating how much sort of things have gone back to that stage. So yeah, as far as large-scale sporting events are concerned, where it's multidisciplinary, I think they're still taking some precautions. But at this sort of level, independent tournaments and things like that, everything is pretty much. A lot is also dependent on what the government is setting as parameters for or protocols. And since the government has not mandated any more testing, no masking, even vaccinations, you don't really have to enter these tournaments anymore, prove that you are vaccinated or not vaccinated. So it's as far as sports is concerned, back to pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, whatever you want to call it.
Thank you so much, Siddhant, for being with us on the show today. And that's all we have for today. For more such stories and updates from around the world, please follow our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow updates from Instagram, Twitter and Facebook handles of People's Dispatch.